Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Bill, who's an intermediate photographer. Bill created this image on the Mindful Eye Zion National Park workshop. Bill used a Canon Mark III 1DS, that's a full-frame sensor camera, 16 to 35 zoom at 16 millimeters, stopped down to f11 and exposed the file for 1/8 of a second. One of the first things I love about this image is quality of line. Bill has something very important here. If you're shooting traditional big scenic landscapes, he's got a real strong feeling of leading line that can lead the viewer all the way through the frame, and that can really help to create the illusion that this is the space that Bill was in. So in other words, not just moving side to side and up and down, but the viewer can actually move from the near subjects out into the middle ground and through the background, through the picture as if it had a third dimension. The other thing, in addition to the beautiful quality of leading line, is just the way that Bill has framed this. I love the fact that I can just get around this idea down here. When I come up here, I can either sort of move in an S-curve kind of way or C-curve way and then come back into the image. Something else that I really like here is this little shape of blue. So much of the time when I'm teaching students and we're working on, let's say, architectural interiors or landscapes, I'll encourage people to shoot variations where they don't include the top of the room. It's tempting to go up there because the light is up there. In interiors, there's a lot of times beautiful lighting fixtures, but there's a lot of contrast up there too, and it can overwhelm everything else. In this case, to me, this really works with the image. From a color standpoint, it helps to balance all the yellow and orange. And from a shape standpoint, again, the quality of line up there is very rhythmic with a lot of these beautiful qualities of line that Bill has included in the composition. Another thing that I really enjoy is the way this little negative space shape here plays off of this negative space shape here, and just the quality of light here. A very dramatic light in the background really helps to pull me all the way through the image. When I think about perfect world improvement for this image, there are a couple of different things that I think about. One of the things that I think about is cleaning color up. One of the difficult things about shooting at a location like Zion, where you've got these red canyon walls, you have a lot of reflected light. When you're looking at it, your eyes correct for this, and you continue to look at different subjects like the grass and the river and the tree and see colors in more of a pure and consistent way. But our cameras can't do that. They pick up all this reflected light, and you get this overlay of yellow-red on top of everything that can rob the image of color depth. So I'd like to work on cleaning that up. I'd like to, this thing is very dramatic back in here, the images, and I'd like to sort of push some areas of the image towards higher contrast, where you get a continuation of that feeling so that this doesn't overwhelm the rest of the image in terms of the way ideas are separating. And then something else I'd like to do, it means we'll have to be open to changing the editorial content of the image, but I'd like to take this rock and scale it into the corner. I want to do that for 3 reasons. Right now, this is a powerful subject in the image. This is one of the main subjects. They're totally lined up with each other, which becomes static when I move through the image. If I move the rock over here, there'll be more of a dynamic flow of movement between those two subjects. The other reason I'd like to move the rock over here is when it gets into this corner, it's going to do a beautiful job of rhyming this space shape. So you'll have this cross-hatching of rhymes in the corners. And the other reason I'd like to move it into this area is this is a big flat negative space shape that traps my eye and really makes this part of the image one of the only areas that's just flattened out and sort of squared off. I'm going to create a longer video that includes all the detail work that I'm doing here, and you can go to the digital darkroom over the course of the next few days and find that video. For now, I'm just going to go through to keep this 10 minutes or less, which is what we're doing from now on the Daily Critique. I'm just going to show you my layers. I copied the background layer first. The next thing that I did was the rescaling work. You know, I'd be really interested to hear from people what they think about this. I know for a lot of people that just the idea of doing these kind of things is counter to what you want to do. I realize that, and I'm interested in hearing that feedback too, but also really interested in hearing whether you think this makes the image work better from a design standpoint. The next 2 layers, it's a blurring technique that I'll show you specifically how I do to create a feeling of blur on the water that's a little bit more like what Bill would have gotten if he would have gone to a ½ second or a second. What I've done is I've blurred those specular highlights in here on the water on one layer in this direction, and I came back and blurred them again in this direction because this water doesn't just move in one direction in a long exposure. It hits and it sort of spreads out, and it creates more of a realistic blur like you've done it in camera. So there's part of the work and there's the other part of the work. Next thing that I did was I came in and I did a levels adjustment to pop the water out. And now I'm going to start working on making colors separate by getting rid of the color cast. I use curves to do that. You can tell that I've cooled the water off, but I've left the rocks in the foreground warm, and I've cooled the green off. I've done that because people associate water with cooler temperature on average, blue or green. And so it makes sense if I'm going to take something and cool it off to do it to the water. And I've left the rocks warm so they'll separate, and I've tried to make more of a pure green. This is real subtle, but I came in and I white balanced this big shadow up in here to get rid of all the blue in there. Again, to make this the area of blue and not this blue, with these two ideas being right next to each other. So this is more subtle. I'll turn it on, and then there's the work that we've done, and there's off. And hard to see, but you can see what you think about that if you can see it at all in the video. And then next thing that I did was a levels adjustment to try and make the whole image pop a little bit more. And I've biased this towards the rocks, the grass, and the cottonwoods. Okay, so I've made the whole image sing a little bit more, but I've biased it towards areas to try and create more of a separation of ideas. I still felt like there was too warm, so I came in and did a color balance to get rid of some red and yellow. And then the last thing that I did was a blank layer in soft light blending mode using black to add even more dimension. Remember, I talked about wanting to make the image balance more overall with this sort of real brooding light and dark next to each other. I'm going to come in and I'm going to paint in areas like this to try and create more of a feeling of that contrast, make it more balanced overall, and there's that change. And so here's where we started, and here's where we ended up. And like I said, please go to the digital darkroom, and you can see in a detailed way how I made all these changes. I want to say a big thank you to Bill for participating in the workshop and for creating a really beautiful shot here. I really love the way Bill's working with the wide angle lens here, and choosing this scene to use leading line in a very powerful way. I love the framing from left to right. I love the way Bill's working with quality of light here. I love that little top sliver of blue. We want to say a big thank you to Bill for sharing this image with us on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique. See you tomorrow, everybody.